I'm on a mission. I want to recreate Star Citizen in real life before the developers release their game. For the past couple weeks, I've been cooking in CAD to bring the P8 family of rifles from the game into the real world. Now, this is going to be a multi-part series because there's a lot of testing that has to go into making these functional props, because I want them to actually do something. So these are going to be airsoft replicas from Star Citizen. We're starting off with the P8 SC because that's the one that we have the most details about, and scaling it up to the P8 AR is a few geometry changes, but the overall mechanisms should be relatively the same. So let me show you what I've got so far. Welcome back to Onshape, guys. This is the P8 SC. We've been building this on stream a couple times, and this is the video that you're watching now. We've made quite a bit of progress. We've got the grip made, lower receiver. The reloading mechanism is actually fully functional at this point for the SC version of the rifle, and I'm currently working on integrating a mechanism to clamp down and release the solenoid whenever you need to do maintenance on the rifle. That's being done with what I have called here the sight base plus solenoid clamp and this unnamed part here. Essentially, it has two lock rings that clamp around the geometry of the solenoid. If we go to the assembly, we can see what that geometry looks like. This red flange here is going to go between those two lock rings, and that should hold everything in pretty good alignment with itself. There's still a few things I need to work out. This blue box over here is a stand-in for the PCB that is supposed to be powering this. I validated that the PCB does work and that everything is functioning as intended, but this is a pretty big chunk of PCB to try to fit into this tiny rifle. And unfortunately, it's not going to get any better with the P8 AR. While the P8 AR is a larger rifle, the space that I have to be able to put this in doesn't get any bigger. So we've got to figure out how to make this thing smaller. I think this is a good analogy for engineering at large. You see, I think a lot of times we think of engineering as you solve the problem and you're done, right? But there's a lot more to that solving the problem part than we might realize. The reason why it didn't work was actually so simple that when I did finally discover it, I felt pretty dumb. If you were with me on stream, you would have seen that we printed this while I was live. And that would eventually evolve into this guy. The difference between them is now we had some geometry going across the top to interface with the magazine when it was inserted. The problem is it didn't work. If I piece this together again, we can kind of see where I did my cutoffs. And what I kept running into is when you would try to insert the magazine, it would just stop and it wouldn't insert all the way. I tried doing different things. I tried changing the diameter of the rings around the center. I tried changing the depth of those rings. I tried changing the overall height of the mag well, and none of it seemed to be working, and it flew in the face of what I knew should be working because I double checked all my measurements and they were right. So what was I missing? Well, the answer is I was missing that little tooth across the top. See, that little tooth is responsible for holding the BBs back from just spilling out all over your floor. And what happens is when the magazine is inserted into a magwell that works correctly, that tooth gets pushed out of the way and allows the BBs to pass by. Well, if we look back at the ring solution that I had here, we should start to see the problem. Where is the tooth allowed to go? A future revision of this part would see that I included a slot on one side of that ring to allow the tooth to move freely out of the way. And this is the key that would make it so that suddenly everything would start fitting together. If we put the magazine into this guy, we get a satisfying click when it's properly seated. The next problem we needed to solve was how do we mount this to the gun itself? Because a magwell is cool and all, but without a way to actually use it, it doesn't really do a whole lot, right? That led to this guy. And the major addition to this one is these slots at the back of the magwell. It just so happens, either by choice or totally by accident, I happened to include perfect geometry to use that to mount to the gun. This was the result of one of the shell commands that I use to hollow out the lower receiver. But it just so happens to make perfect rails for this to slide onto. Great, progress. But it still needed a little bit of refinement. The major issue that this one had was it was very difficult to assemble. A magwell is cool and all, and even one that attaches to a lower receiver is great, but without a way to assemble it, it still can't serve its main function, which is to retain magazines when they have ammo in them, and release them when the user pulls the mag release. So I needed to tweak the mag catch design a little bit, and that would eventually lead us to this version. This one is by and large operational. It does actually work when it has proper spring tension applied to it. That's the next issue I need to solve, and hopefully one we're going to tackle today. Stepping back into Onshape, we've got some pretty clever solutions figured out. We added a fillet to the front edges of these cam sections so that they will have an easier time navigating the geometry inside the rifle. And we also added a chamfer to make it so that it doesn't run into the top of the magwell like it was doing before. I didn't show that on video, but trust me, it was quite annoying. And if we take a look at this side, we can see that I've added a circular peg across the top and bottom of this mechanism, and that is to interact with a binder clip. That is what we're actually going to be using as our spring tension to keep this thing in the correct position when it's not being pushed down by the user. Now I could hop on to McMaster-Carr and order a specific spring with a specific tension and thickness and size, but that's going to dramatically increase the cost. And if my end users are going to be trying to replicate this, I want to keep costs down for them as much as possible. So binder clips are something that you can buy in bulk. They're pretty reliable springs, they have pretty standardized sizes, and they're not going to break the bank for something that you can't use for anything else. The next thing I need to validate is whether or not the geometry that I've added to accommodate a trigger is actually going to work. That's what this Pride Rock looking thing is supposed to do. It's supposed to sit over the pin that the trigger uses to rotate and allow you to pop it back in and out by just pushing it forward. In order to test that, I don't actually need all of this to be here. So I'm actually going to cut most of it off in the software and then just print the section that I'm actually testing. While we work on getting that over to the printer for printing the new part, let's take a look at the PCB side of things and see what kind of progress we've made in that respect. All right, what you've got on screen right now is the microchip that controls everything, the PCB that we've been working on. And if I click the little joystick, we get access to all these settings that we have the option of changing. We can have shot delay, burst delay, dwell time, that's how long the solenoid is held open. Trigger debounce is the minimum time before a trigger is allowed to be pulled again. Burst shots, setting it to 1 gives you semi-auto. Setting it to anything higher than 1 gives you a burst of that count. And shot limit I have set to 10 at the moment because I want to show off one of the next settings, which is force reload, which makes you reload the magazine by pressing a button, and then you are able to keep firing. This button, though, can be integrated into the magwell to make it so that it only activates when you pull the magazine out. Binary trigger is another option, and then muzzle flash is something that should be working, so I want to test that as well. So I've got this connected to a breadboard over here that has 3 buttons and then a LED. I might have the LED plugged into the wrong pin at the moment. I'll need to check my code and see which pin is actually assigned to muzzle flash because it should be illuminating. But that little click that you hear is the solenoid being actuated. Now if I hold this one and then press this button, it will fire until I've shot the rest of the 10 shots. Then I must click this button before it will let me do it again. You can see when you do reach that shot limit, it doesn't matter which mode you try to shoot it in, your gun is empty. It's not going to do anything until you click the button. I want to take some time to thank PCBWay. They have generously sponsored this video by providing the PCBA services I use to make the brains of this rifle. PCBA is short for Printed Circuit Board Assembly and is just one of many services that PCBWay has on offer. If we take a look at their homepage, we'll see all kinds of manufacturing processes available. This is very exciting to me because this empowers all of us to make whatever we can imagine. Don't have a CNC machine? You can still have CNC precision in your projects, as well as so many other options available. Thanks again to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. And that should bring us to this version. This actually works. If I press down on the top of the vertical slider here, we can pull the magazine out. When we slide it back in, magazine is stuck in place. So I'm pretty happy with this mechanism. The only problem is I cannot move those finger buttons at all. This is an issue with tolerancing. I did not provide any added space, so they are very stiff to move with your fingers, and so they're not actually connected to the mechanism right now. We're gonna fix that. That is so satisfying. It works! The magazine buttons are held in place with some 5mm steel dowel pins. These are readily available online at various retailers. I got mine off of Amazon. It works pretty good. So magazine slides into the magwell, and then you would be grabbing it from the front, pulling down with your thumb, and then you can pull the magazine out. Pretty simple. It works pretty reliably, so I am pretty happy. The other detail we tested was this trigger mechanism. So we wanted to make sure that the airsoft trigger would seat well, and it does. So we get some pretty good actuation out of it. Not a ton of travel, but certainly enough for what we need, and any more and it would start to be a bit weird. So this is a pretty good start on the P8 series of rifles. And what remains for me to figure out is I need to make the PCB smaller so that I can get it to fit inside the gun. And I need to finish up the solenoid mounting hardware. I need to add a buttstock to the rifle, and there's a few more details that I need to go through on another pass. But as far as functional parts go, we are about halfway there, and I'm really happy about that. If you've made it this far, first off, thank you. I love you. And second, make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube things so that you don't miss my future content. I do engineering blended with video games, and if that's what you like, that's what you're going to see.